he's a fan favorite at this point. Timothy, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Frank. Nice to be with you again.
It's great to be with you. Is this your first time on in 2024, or were you on early in January? I forget.
I believe this is my first time on in 2024.
Wow. All right. I was bringing up all of your traveling exploits and your adventuring around the world, and I was wondering how many continents you've been on. I don't think you've been on. You've been to Antarctica or no yet?
No, too cold for me.
Okay.
No, I haven't been to Antarctica yet, or if I'll ever go.
So then what about everything? Is it just North America, South America? You've been to Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, anything?
Not Asia. I've not been to Asia yet, or Africa for that matter.
I took you for somebody who would have already been to the pyramids. You ever have intention of going out there?
Yeah, I actually probably in the next year or so am going to go to Egypt and Ethiopia. But much of my research keeps me in South America, in Central and South America. But obviously, I have a great interest in Egypt. But yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but I try to travel as little as possible these days because it just sucks so bad. The airlines are just awful.
I'm with you.
Freaking airplanes are falling apart.
I'm with you, man. It's it makes me grateful that I live in such a big country that I have not seen probably well over 90% of, because or even probably even more than that. But it makes me grateful to live here, because now I'm more and more just committed to getting my family into the car and planning road trips and just seeing things that we can get to ourselves. Because you're right, it's between that. And you just don't know. It's a world that is being forced into a very ugly transition. And I know that there's a growing resistance to that. But of course, with resistance comes the escalation of force that I think we were all trying to anticipate down the line. So I know. We're trying to keep it close to home.
I have some interesting U.S.-based investigations for this that I've planned for this year. One of them is right here in Montana, where I live, chasing down a very interesting Bigfoot story, going on a Bigfoot hunt. So I'm looking forward to that.
Is it by you?
It's in Montana.
That's interesting right there. The cryptids,
an undisclosed location in Montana.
Now, when you say undisclosed location, is this one of those things where it is a known stomping grounds of this one appearance, this one creature that somebody has reported to you? And who reported the creature to you?
It's a friend of mine that had a very interesting story to tell. Montana, a guy that is Montana born and bred, and in a relatively remote area of Montana, he had an interesting encounter, and so I plan on following up on that if I can this summer.
Damn, are you going to go camping?
Possibly.
Yeah, it takes balls, man. You tell me a Bigfoot is in any patch of woods out there, especially.
I'm not worried about Bigfoot when I camp around here. I'm worried about grizzly bears.
Okay, well, that's that too. Between the both of them, I mean, geez, ever since I watched Missing 411, and it's a whole other level to this thing. Have you ever seen the Missing 411 UFO connection episode?
I believe I've seen the first Missing 411 film, but I don't think I've seen the UFO one.
I think that you would really appreciate that one. But while we're on the talk of cryptids, I was just talking earlier on today. I was having a pre-interview with a guy that I want to bring on in late June. He's a member of the Navajo Nation, and he has a lot of really interesting family and cultural insight into skinwalkers, and of course Bigfoot. And he's in like northeast or north, I forget which corner of New Mexico. And it made me start thinking about your work, and especially in the respect that we haven't spoken too much about cryptids in particular over the years. And but one in particular, I don't know if you want to call this a cryptid, because there's so much more biblical roots to the Kandahar giant and the Nephilim. But I wanted to ask you about the Kandahar giant again, because you have had one of the banner interviews with a a witness out there. Where is that story right now? Can you put it into a nutshell just for those out there who have not heard it before? And I'd love to ask you some follow-up questions on that.
Okay. Well, years ago, while I was still working with Steve Quayle, Steve and I founded a company called Gen 6 Productions, and we were making a film. We were making the second installment in the True Legends documentary series. We flew into Bozeman, Montana, an individual who was an active duty AC-130, I always misspeak when I say that, C-130, not AC-130, C-130 pilot. And he came into the studio and we got to know him and he showed us his credentials and we interviewed him for the film and he told us a remarkable story. And this story has since gone viral all over the internet and has taken on some interesting, has taken on some additional details that we did not get from the pilot. So I think the story has grown and has transformed into something of a myth at this point. But here's what our pilot told us. He said that back in 2005, he was flying missions into Bagram Airfield. They would often call him in to pick up high-value targets, or rather, high-value cargo. And he was flying a C-130. And he, on this particular mission, he landed at Bagram. And he thought it was going to be like any other day where they go and they load up a couple of high-value Taliban guys and fly them to Qatar. But something very different happened on this day. He and his crew disembarked from the aircraft, and they were immediately met on the tarmac by who he describes as the babysitters. He thinks that they were Air Force intelligence or CIA or somebody from the intelligence community. And they were accompanying a pallet that a forklift had brought over. And immediately when the pilot walked up to the pallet, he and his crew members walked up to the pallet, they were confronted with a very potent, musty odor. And he described it as being overpowering. It was more than just the stench of death. It was like very musty body odor, extremely potent. And they realized that what they were going to be transporting was an enormous dead humanoid. And this being was laying on the pallet in the fetal position, and he was covered with a tarp. But the tarp wasn't large enough to cover his entire body, and so his feet and his hands and part of his body were hanging out of the tarp and part of his head. And the air cargo pallets are about 9 feet long I believe they're 7 by 9, somewhere in there. And this guy was completely filling up the entire pallet. He was in the fetal position. So let's say from top to bottom, this 9 foot tall pallet, this guy is covering the length of the entire thing in the fetal position. So they estimated him to be about 10 to 12 feet tall. A pallet standard weight, the air cargo pallet weight, is 1,500 pounds. And the loadmaster weighed the actual cargo on the pallet, because they always have to weigh whatever they're loading onto the aircraft, they have to weigh it. The loadmaster weighed this giant at 1,100 pounds. He had pale white skin, and they don't know if this was simply because he was dead or if that was the natural color of his skin, but it was a pale whitish color. His feet were enormous. Our pilot and his crew members were they were taking turns putting their feet up to his feet just to compare the size, and and he told us that it was just the feet were enormous.
And you were able to confirm the military background of this guy, that the pilot?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely, we did. As I said, he was still active duty when we interviewed him. Obviously, our pilot inquired. There were some military guys standing around. I think there were some Marines standing around, and also these intelligence officers. And our pilot inquired as to where they had discovered this giant. What was the background story? And they told him that this being had been inhabiting a cave in the mountains of Afghanistan near a village, and the villagers were venerating him. They were bringing gifts, probably food and drink, to the mouth of the cave. And I believe it was Marines, it might have been special ops guys who were reconning the village. They assumed that the villagers were aiding and abetting the Taliban. And so they sent a team. And again, I don't know if it was Marines or special ops guys, but a team went in to confront what they thought were going to be the Taliban. And instead of the Taliban, they encountered this 10 to 12 foot tall, 1,100 pound giant. And our pilot told us that he was told that the rumor was that the giant killed the first team.
The whole team?
Killed them all.
Okay.
And so they sent a second team in, and when the second team got there, the giant was eating. It was feasting on the bodies of the other dead soldiers, and but this second team were able to bring him down. They were able to engage and kill the giant, and then they flew in a helicopter and they loaded him up and transported him to Bagram airfield. And this happened, I believe he told me that this had happened the previous day. So this giant was freshly dead. And our pilot, they weighed him, they loaded him up. They were told when they got, I should have said that when they first disembarked from the aircraft, these intelligence officers told them immediately, no pictures, don't record anything you see here, this never happened. So after they loaded him up, they flew him to Qatar, to a U.S. airbase in Qatar, and unloaded him. And then the body of the giant was loaded onto another craft, I think a different kind of craft. I can't remember what he said exactly. And our pilot heard later, he says through the grapevine, that the body of the dead giant ended up ultimately at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. So those are the basic details that we were told. And I know that this story, as I said, has sort of evolved. Steve Quayle was the first one to publicize this story, the details of this story, and then Steve and I interviewed the pilot and released the interview in our film. And since the publication of the True Legends films, it was the second installment, The Unholy Sea. Again, the story has evolved. It's been picked up online, and bits and pieces of the story have been modified and altered, and I think there's been some exaggeration and some elements of the story,
but only by those who are re-syndicating it and all that, not because they have access to your source. And okay.
No one else has talked to our source. No one else has talked to our source. He's not appeared in any other documentaries or interviews. In fact, we filmed him in silhouette. He did not want his name to be used or his face to be seen. He figured that, ultimately he was taking a risk. He knew he was taking a risk, and he was pretty nervous about it. And he knew that, his higher ups wouldn't be very difficult for them to find out that it was him, should they ever see the film. And he was willing to take that risk, but at the very least, he wanted to at least cover his face and for his name not to be published. So
he also has to understand that if he doesn't, it's a fantastical story. and one that really, I don't know, a lot of people want to believe. But there is also this burning problem of proof. Like, it's one thing if he had taken a picture, smuggled it out, or like. So what? How's he addressed that question? Because I'm sure it's one of the biggest things that that any reasonable skeptic will come to you with. They say, "Hey, listen, I love this. I want to believe the story, but what more can we go on with this?"
Well, first of all, we were able to confirm his credentials. He was active duty. He was an AC-130 pilot. We had heard from other individuals in the military that they were aware of this incident. It was obviously, the Pentagon tried to cover it up, but it leaked. And so we were contacted by other, and I have been subsequent to publishing that documentary, have been contacted by other individuals who were in Afghanistan at the time, special ops guys, Marines, who confirmed to me that they did hear about the giant. Not all the Marines who were in Afghanistan in 2005 or special ops guys, military personnel, would have heard about the story. So just because someone comes along and says, "Well, I was in Afghanistan in 2005 and I never heard anything about a giant," so what? I mean, it wasn't publicized. It was something that the Pentagon was trying to keep under wraps. But some guys did hear of it. Now, I will say, and I got to be very, very, very careful here. Recently, let me say I was somewhere recently, and I encountered an individual who was an Air Force officer. He was in Afghanistan at the base while this incident happened, and he was working very closely with General Petraeus. And when I asked this individual, he told me that he there's a lot of non-disclosure things that he couldn't really talk about, and I asked him about the giant in Afghanistan. What had he heard of the giant in Afghanistan? The giant that was killed. He looked at me, the blood drained out of his face. He looked at me and he went like this.
No.
And he backed away and basically started to leave. Basically saying, I can't talk about that. His wife was with him, and she looked at me and mouthed to me, he can't talk about that. And obviously, this was one of the non-disclosure things that he couldn't tell me about, and he could get in big trouble. So I've had things like that. And as I said, other military guys, special ops guys, contact me and confirm the story. Now, what's the proof that it actually happened? Where are the photos? Where's the body? Well, who the hell knows?
Right.
I don't know. It's a story. The evidence is anecdotal at best. I personally, because I interviewed the pilot myself, I absolutely 100% believe him.
You at least believe that he's telling the truth. He believes
I absolutely believe he's telling the truth, and I think that there's been some intentional disinformation sown online about this story to try and make it sound to discredit the story over the years. And this, I don't remember when we published that film. It was years ago, maybe 8 years ago since we published that film. And so the story has taken on a life of its own since then. But there was another individual who came forward who my colleague L.A. Marsuli interviewed, and he seemed to, I don't know if that, I'm not sure if that individual is credible, but he added some additional details, and except for, I believe he said that the giant was killed in 2003. So we assumed we were talking about the same giant because there's too many similarities in the story. But then again, it could have been a different giant. Could have been. There's probably. I'm sure it's impossible that there's just one. There's got to be more than one. So, as I said, all I can tell you is that this was the information that was given to us, to me and Steve Quayle, in the interview, and he was an active duty AC-130 pilot. His credentials checked out. He was very nervous. about the risk he was taking. He knew he was probably going to get found out ultimately, but he didn't want to show his face, and he didn't want his name anywhere. So he wasn't looking for clout. We did not pay him. We did not pay him to do this.
Well, let me pivot to something where your expertise really can come in and shine on this again, because now we're in a position where we can almost like build up a character profile for the giant. You've discussed the Nephilim on this show before. The giants descended from the offspring of the Watchers. But as far as their level of intellect, their level of how they conducted themselves, by whether that was written down and preserved through local folklore or whatever. I listened to a lot of Lloyd Pye's presentations over the years talking about all the different types of Bigfoot kind of species that overlap our own, and how there was actually people living among these creatures, and there was actually some understanding. Oh, and here you are,
great Lloyd Pye.
Yeah, and did you know him, by the way?
I didn't know him, no, but I followed his lectures with great interest.
Anyway, what you're describing here about local villagers bringing food, sustenance over to this this giant, but then that kind of checks out from other things that I've heard about. But when you talk about a giant that takes out an entire squad of Marines, and then another squad comes in and he's sitting there like a Wampa from Hoth in Star Wars, eating it seems so caveman-like and so barbaric. I always wonder, what was their level of intellect? Were they really just like these bloodthirsty creatures, or was there any human-like interaction that we know ourselves?
Well, the answer to that question is complex. One detail I forgot to mention was that this giant was wearing foot wraps. So he's very primitive. He was wearing his feet were wrapped with canvas, some sort of burlap or something like that. So he was very primitive. All right. So there's all kinds of legends pertaining to giants. When you look back in ancient history, almost every major civilization had legends of giants. Of course, the Greeks had all kinds of stories of giants, encyclopedias, and the Romans obviously also had stories of giants, even claimed to have fought tribes of giants. The Germanic tribes, in which there were giants, I should say. The Inca and the Aztec, and all over the world you have legends of giants. And obviously in the biblical narrative is rife with references to giants, the Book of Enoch, the Dead Sea Scrolls material. So I believe that giants did indeed exist. And when I say giants, I mean like this one that we've been talking about, the Kandahar giant, 10 to 12 foot tall, 1,100 pounds, that stature of giants. I absolutely believe they existed. And I believe that they still exist. So in the past, let's assume for a moment, okay, let's stay within the parameters of they existed, okay, for the sake of argument. These beings would have been venerated as demigods. And indeed, this is the kind of context we encounter Goliath. Goliath was a celebrated warrior among the Philistines. And so these would have been highly esteemed individuals. We know that the Phoenicians, for example, had a cult of giants. They had rituals and traditions relating to giants that suggested that giants were not some fictitious mythological creature within their pantheon. Rather, giants were living creatures that were dwelling among them and were venerated as great warriors and mighty men. And So the giants of old would have not been brutish, savage creatures. They would have been as cultured as the civilizations in which they were embedded. And so I think that that's an important question, because when you think about giants in the ancient context, it would all depend on, in regard to their intelligence and how civilized or uncivilized they were. It would depend on if those clans of giants were members of a sophisticated culture themselves, or were embedded in a sophisticated culture, civilization. So, which I think was the case. However,
at least.
However, giants today, there are no longer giants living among human beings. There's no longer giants intermingling in our cultures or in our civilization. So these giants would be hidden away. They would be living in perhaps the bowels of the earth, in the caves, in the mountains, like you referenced Bigfoot. Like Bigfoot, they would be furtive and very savage and barbaric. They would not be educated. They would not speak any kind of language that we would be familiar with. Most likely, perhaps they speak Farsi or something in the Middle East. But we would expect, because we don't see giants roaming the earth right now, we would expect that should we encounter a giant, it would be just like the description that I gave here from our pilot's story. He would be savage, and their numbers would be very few today, and encounters with them would be exceedingly rare. Would you Bigfoot as an example?
Would you think that they would be more so likely that they would be millennia old relics of like an initial generation?
Yes.
Or okay, not born within the last couple hundred years by some kind of
genetic experimentation or something like that.
Either that, or the fact that maybe two giants actually were able to copulate in a cave. Like they're actually.
Oh yeah, no, I think that as I said earlier, I think that assuming this story is true, and as I said, I believe it is, absolutely believe it is, then I think we can also assume that there are more than one. I mean, he's got to come from somewhere. He's not just this isn't just a genetic aberration here. We're not talking about someone with gigantism. This is a non-human creature. This is something altogether different than us. It's certainly humanoid. Oh, and by the way, another detail that we were told by the pilot is the giant had 6 fingers and 6 toes. So six digits on each hand, 6 digits on each foot. So this is obviously a humanoid, non-human entity, and the circumstances in which it was found and killed suggest that this is not an escaped genetic experiment from one of our labs. I mean, that would be very unlikely in a cave in Afghanistan. This is an indigenous being. It's an indigenous creature. And that means that since we're not looking at gigantism here, and clearly we're not looking at gigantism, as we all know, people with gigantism is a pituitary gland disorder. And it leads to an aberration in the function of the individual's biology. Their hearts are usually very large. They're very weak. I mean, Andre the Giant was perhaps an exception, and he was exceptionally strong, but he did not live very long.
And he would be small compared to what you're talking about.
Oh, he would be small, certainly, compared to this. We're 1,100 pounds. Okay, 1,100 pounds, 10 to 12 foot tall. This is not, as I said, anything to do with this being did not spawn from our genome. Let's put it that way. So he must have parents. He must have a mom and a dad, and So there must be more than one. They are breeding, and they must be breeding in deep in the mountains, hidden away, or in a cave. And it may be that there are very, very, very few left of them, and that the Afghanis have known about them for generations. Now, people will say, well, how can that be? Well, very simple. It's very simple. How many of you have been to the mountains of Afghanistan? And I'm not talking about since in the war in the conflict in 2005. I mean, how many people have gone on vacation in the mountains of Afghanistan? How many resorts are there and hotels? None is the answer. That's one of the most primitive areas on planet Earth. I mean, the people there are basically throwbacks to the medieval days, and are living in a very low level of civilization. There's no communication out there. They're tribes living in the mountains and in the desert. Most Americans wouldn't even know anything about Afghanistan had we not gone to war, had we not entered the conflict after 9/11. So this is an area of the earth where, outside of resident Afghanis, hardly anyone ever went. So it's the perfect place where if giants exist today, it's exactly the kind of an environment you would expect to find them. And especially if they're living under the ground. I mean, you would be hard pressed to find them anyway, but especially if they're living in caves and are protected by the local people. So
that's one hell of a life, though. Gotta say, that's one hell of a life. I mean, what is the point? I mean, what's the point of anything? You're living in the ground. You're waiting for the locals to deliver you some goats, every day. That is it would make more sense if they were waiting and biding their time for one last battle on Earth. But that would require a little bit more of a little bit less of a feral mindset and more of a strategic mind, which it seems that has been burned out of them.
This was a feral being. By the way, he also had red hair. These details are just coming back to me as I'm thinking about the story. He had red hair. As I said, the feral's a good word. This is a feral creature, obviously, and they've been cut off from civilization for so long. And as I said earlier, in the past, they would have integrated with the various cultures, and there were tribes of giants. I mean, the Bible talks about multiple tribes of giants, including the Nephilim, the Anakim, the Zamzumim, the Emim, and so on. And so I believe that Canaan, the land of Canaan, was populated by tribes of these guys. At least some of them. I mean, they were variegated in stature. That's apparent in the biblical text, because we read, for example, that the Emim and the Zamzumim were descended from the sons of Anak, or the Anakim, who were. The indication is that the Anakim were larger, and that the Emim and Zamzumim were of a smaller stature. They were still considered giants, but they weren't as large as the Anakim and then as the Nephilim. So most of the giants were either killed, because I know that people are wondering, well, what happened to them? Most of them were either killed or were bred into the gene pool. In other words, if you have giants copulating with regular-sized human women, you do that for a couple of generations, and you lose some of those genetic traits, and you get NBA-sized guys or guys that are unusually tall for the time, 6.5 feet tall, but no longer 10 to 12 feet tall, 1,100 pounds.
Yeah.
So, and there was a mandate to kill the giants. Moses and Joshua had a mandate to eradicate these Canaanitish tribes, precisely because they were hybridized and there were giants among them.
That must have been really hard to do. If this one guy can take out an entire platoon of modern Marines, that must have been a real hard thing to do with people who were just out there with spears and bows and swords and that.
Well, hundreds of thousands of of people. I mean, you're talking about tens and hundreds of thousands of warriors fighting against clans of giants. The clans probably, who knows how many people were in these clans, how many giants, how many members the clans had, maybe hundreds, maybe a few thousand, but certainly not hundreds of thousands. So they would have been greatly outnumbered. And no matter how large you are, if you're surrounded by, 20 guys throwing spears at you, ultimately you're going to succumb, even though you're much stronger and probably, I mean, I would imagine because these giants, we're not talking about a pituitary gland problem. These guys would have been much more agile and stronger than ordinary human beings. And the pilot, for example, I remember him telling us that the giant laying on the pallet, laying on his side, even on his side, he was very, the bulk was very tall, and they were just taking their hands and sort of knocking on his body with their fists, pounding on his body, and the pilot told me it was like a brick. I mean, of course he was dead, so rigor mortis, I'm sure, set in, but he was like a brick. I mean, the guy was just muscle mass, and the giant was just enormously powerful being. So,
well, let me ask you this before we go on a quick intermission break. This was actually sent in by a member of the audience, Casey. So can you bring this up, the idea that the Fallen didn't only breed with human women? Is that possible? I feel that that aspect doesn't get covered a lot in the Nephilim conversation. Maybe that's why we have stories of creatures like the Hydra and the Kraken. Or was there any other cross breeding between these beings and Earth creatures? Was it only human women?
The Book of Enoch specifies human women. It does not indicate that the Watchers were breeding with animals or something like that. However, in some of the other Dead Sea Scrolls, such as the Book of Giants, there is perhaps an intimation that was happening, but at the same time, it's so highly fragmented, the Book of Giants, that the language that the translators use is miscegenation. The word, rather, is miscegenation. That the Watchers chose, various animals for the purpose of miscegenation. Well, miscegenation doesn't necessarily mean you're breeding with these animals. Rather, it means that you're doing something akin to cross-species genetics. So, we don't have, in regard to the story, in regard to the Dead Sea Scrolls story of the Watchers, there's no definitive text that says that the Watchers were, let's be frank, having sex with animals, and that those animals were giving birth to centaurs and things like that. No, that's not apparent anywhere. Although there definitely is, as I said, language that suggests that the Watchers were engaging in cross-species genetics, that they were interbreeding creatures, or that they were engaging in some kind of a high-tech genetic experimentation with these creatures. But again, that's in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it's not in the Book of Enoch. It's certainly not in the Genesis account. So it's highly speculative. People should, the story of the Watchers copulating with human women, progenerating a race of giants is absolutely apparent in the Book of Enoch. That is what happens in the Book of Enoch, but anything beyond that is speculation. It's just conjecture.
Well, that's good. That's a good place to leave off, because I have a lot of awesome follow-up questions, and I want to talk to you about Kona Blue and the just a few clips that I saw between Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan. I have just some questions about this, because it's probably something that you have done a lot of big dives into, right up your alley. And I welcome you all for this wonderful edition of an anthology of talks that has now gone down between Timothy Alberino and Quite Frankly. So, guys, wherever you are, hang out and enjoy the rest of the show. We will be right back. Timothy, I'm going to put you on mute for just a second, and we will be back in a moment.
If you enjoy my analysis on these topics and would like to hear more from me, I invite you to join the Alberino Analysis Members Community, where you will gain access to my weekly private briefings, live stream Q&A sessions, behind-the-scenes updates on my current projects and expeditions, community features that facilitate interaction with myself and other members, early access to tickets for events I happen to be conducting, and a convenient mobile app to keep you notified and up to date on everything I publish. In addition to all this, annual subscribers will be treated to an advanced screening of 3 episodes in a TV series I've been working on for several years. These films alone are worth the price of admission. The Alberino Analysis Members Community is the best way to connect with me and support my work. If you would like to become a member, you can find a link to the subscription page in the description of this video, or visit thealberinoanalysis.com. I hope to see you in our community.
Timothy, I know that we've talked a lot about transhumanism and the post-human world that is on the way and how to prepare for that and all that. But when you talk about giants from their natural state, from their biblical origins, and those that may be getting genetically engineered, started thinking to myself, what the hell? Is that even possible? Especially with all the, in the age of CRISPR. I mean, do you think that a lot of the medical experiments that are going on right now are really there to lay a groundwork for transforming people into, being battle ready for the final battle? Is this really all about military readiness for a giant battle of mankind?
I don't know about that, but I would say that all of these, let's call them transhumanist technologies that we're seeing being developed right now are going to make it possible for us to fundamentally alter our biology. So we are definitely headed for a post-human paradigm. What's interesting is I was talking to someone about Yuval Harari the other day, who is, of course, the transhumanist futurist prophet of the global elite, and it struck me as I'm talking about him that his name actually is, his middle name is Noah, Yuval Noah Harari, which I find quite interesting because he's predicting that in 100 to 200 years from now, there will be no more human beings left on planet Earth. And that's precisely what I predict in my book, Birthright, although I don't say there will be none. I say there will be scarcely a human being left on planet Earth. There will be some. But we are undoubtedly heading for a post-human paradigm, a paradigm in which good old-fashioned human beings are, as I said, almost non-existent, and the world will be populated by genetically enhanced, cybernetically enhanced, hybridized humanoids who are also enhanced with artificial intelligence and who are interfacing with one another and with technology in a way that's totally exotic to us today, because here we are interfacing with each other over the internet, and we're doing so through screens and using our fingers to type and control a mouse, when in the future it's not going to be screens. It's going to be interfacing through the brain. It's going to be a different kind of communication altogether. The speed of thought, and obvious, it's obvious that this is where things are headed, or at least this is where the technologists would like for things to head. And certainly these transhumanist technologies are going to be first used for military application. The utility of cybernetically enhanced, genetically enhanced soldiers on the battlefield has not escaped the the Pentagon has not escaped the equivalent of the Pentagon in China or in Russia. And indeed, Vladimir Putin's always warning about this. Everyone's always talking about the nuclear arms race and nuclear war. And Vladimir Putin is always reminding us that actually the arms race today is super soldiers. And that's what really concerns him about the battlefields of the future, is this idea of super soldiers and also AI-empowered robots. So I don't know about, I don't know exactly what the ultimate plan for this is outside of we're headed for a post-human paradigm. And there is, biblically speaking, theologically speaking, there is certainly an agenda afoot as it pertains to the directed evolution of the human species out of Adam and into a post-human condition. But that is a very complex conversation.
Oh, I know. We've inhabited. I guess the main thing to take away is that sooner than later we may have a lot more in common with the Kandahar giant than we do now. A lonely creature in the desert that is one of the last of its kind, and now you're talking about a time when being a born and bred, true, pure human being may become as rare as that giant's existence. So I think that's a sobering thought. But when you talk about the consciousness link with technology, it makes me, of course, start thinking about this little, I don't know, I guess this UFO tour that Tucker Carlson has been on. And I reserve judgment on all this stuff and these people. I don't know them personally, so I just kind of listen to what they're putting in the public sphere and getting people to concentrate on. And then I talk to people like you to try to hash it all out. Tucker Carlson was on Joe Rogan. It's one of a few times that he had brought up UFOs and the intelligences behind them. And what he concludes is that the entire phenomena is supernatural. I know that you come from a standpoint where we have a mix here, that there's a little bit more than just the spiritual going on. But what do you think about all of this stuff, about this being essentially supernatural for him?
By Tucker's own admission, he's a novice in this space. He said in that Joe Rogan podcast that he was totally uninterested in the subject for most of his life, and he's only recently become interested, I believe he said, since 2017, when the New York Times published the material on the Nimitz incident. And so Tucker's only just beginning to dip his toes into the pool, so to speak. So he's by no means, when he says that the entire thing is supernatural, he's by no means drawing upon decades of research or volumes of literature that he's read. This is his peripheral analysis of the phenomenon. So I think Tucker's probably is talking to some people who are maybe from the intelligence community, maybe from the military, who are confirming the reality of the phenomenon. So he knows it's real. That's apparent with Tucker. He's absolutely convinced it's real, and as is Joe Rogan. And from his limited knowledge of the phenomenon, he assesses that it must be supernatural. And but the examples that he gives as to why the phenomenon must be supernatural, all of these examples can be answered have technological explanations, let's say. So I think that, and the word supernatural is being used in a very loose way by Tucker Carlson, by the way. He's using it in a very loose way. He's not necessarily saying that it's a non-physical phenomenon, but that it's a phenomenon that exceeds the boundaries of the laws of physics, which I totally disagree with that. I think the phenomenon is well within the boundaries of the laws of physics. It's just a level of physics that we don't comprehend yet. And so, just like you go back hundreds of years into the past, and people thought that, so many illnesses were caused by foul air. Nobody knew that microbes existed, and bacteria and viruses. Illnesses were attributed almost exclusively to, the weather, or to demonic activity, or, as I said, to foul air, or whatever else was popular at the time to explain disease. They had a very uneducated theory of disease. Whereas today, because we have the agency of technology, i.e. microscopes, we know about bacteria and microorganisms and viruses. So in the same way, when UFOs, when advanced aerospace vehicles of non-human origin display these incredible, unbelievable maneuvering capabilities, so many people automatically assume, oh, that just can't be, that's got to be supernatural. That's not obeying the laws of physics. Well, it's just that it's not that it's not obeying the laws of physics. It's that we don't understand the totality of those laws. We are at best we understand maybe 10%, and that might be very generous estimate of the laws of physics. And so, I think he's completely mistaken when he says the phenomenon is supernatural. And you would have to define that term also. I mean, because I'm sure, as I said earlier, Tucker's using it in a very loose way, and he probably would admit that the phenomenon is indeed physical. But I forget. Did you have another question associated with that?
I know. Actually, that leads us right into the Kona Blue talk. Now, I read a little bit about this declassification of what was a rumor for a while. Turns out, after declassification, take a look at it, and it was a proposed program that never got off the ground. But the fact that it was proposed and the things that it was talking about is interesting enough. But again, retrieving, developing remote viewing comms, determining the baseline for physical transport across dimensional and space-time barriers we're talking about. And then there's also rapid response medical teams for anybody who's been injured, servicemen that have been injured, and Carlson said that there was people injured by this technology.
There certainly have been, yeah. So that's known.
So as far as what do you think about Kona Blue in particular? Is it a red herring? Because there's so much in it that's already exists. We know that the Gateway Project exists. So, but there is that interesting link between consciousness, how consciousness interacts with technology. I mean, you were just talking about this right here before we even got into the subject, how human consciousness and technology going into the next phases of our de-evolution is going to be so important. It has nothing to do with UFOs in particular. That could be just the technology that is, subdermal over the next 200 years. But still, what do you think about Kona Blue's resurgence?
Well, it's important to understand what Kona Blue is. What it was, rather. Kona Blue was a DHS prospective special access program, and it was terminated on the 10th of February in 2012. So it never got off the ground. It was to be an extension, actually, of ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And it was, as I said, it was going to be hosted within the Department of Homeland Security, which is interesting because that puts it within the context of a security threat to the homeland. And there is indication in the documentation that this was that Bigelow was involved here, and possibly NIDS, although they're not directly named. I think Bigelow's name does appear in the document, but it's redacted. And it looks like a NIDS type organization. In the documentation, they were going to combine. I mean, the prospective special access program was going to sort of combine a bunch of different fields together. It was going to combine areas of study like remote viewing, studies in consciousness, as you said. Skinwalker Ranch was going to be a subject of study.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it was so they're combining a bunch of stuff together here, sort of taking a shotgun approach, and the documentation acknowledges the existence of it. Rather than use the word acknowledge, let me say that it alludes to the existence of non-human technology that was recovered, crash retrieval. And so they were going to try and get access to that material, to study it, to see what they can derive, what sort of technology might be derived from. It's very broad. And it was ambitious. And it clearly was an attempt to continue to expand the investigation of ATIP. And so it was a group within perhaps the private sector, the Pentagon, perhaps the intelligence community, who wanted to continue the ATIP investigation and as I said, expand it into these other arenas, consciousness and remote viewing. And it was terminated. So whether it ever got off the ground at all, or whether it was simply terminated right out of the gates, I don't know. But it never went anywhere. So it's really a non-story, Kona Blue. I know a lot of people are making a big deal about it, but it's a non-starter, literally.
That's why I wonder if it's big red herring. You have Tucker Carlson on the biggest show in the world right now, and they're talking about this, and
it's not a red herring. It's an intentional, and it's not a leak. It was published by the Pentagon. It was declassified. The documents are declassified. You can go download them and read them right now. They're declassified. It's part of a controlled narrative. Like, hey, what can we give them? These people are clamoring for something about UFOs. Let's give them this, because it says nothing. It tells you nothing definitively. It just tells you there was a group, assumedly within the Pentagon, assumedly private industry, Bigelow and his group, that wanted to do these things and propose this special access program, and it was rejected, it was denied. That's all it tells you. But we can infer that these subjects are taken seriously by the Pentagon because of the way that the document is written. It's not laughed out of the room. And so I would affirm all of these things as being real phenomenon. Remote viewing, skinwalker, all of these things are real phenomenon. Consciousness is definitely, you want to talk about, if you ask me, are UFOs just a supernatural phenomenon? And obviously my answer is no. And then someone might say, well, wait a minute, how can you say it's not? What about X, Y, Z? Well, my answer is this: it's not a supernatural phenomenon, but it is a phenomenon that is intricately associated with consciousness. We don't understand human consciousness. We don't know what we're dealing with. Even with our own consciousness, the human psyche is exceedingly powerful, much more powerful than we've comprehended. And I think that, and I've said this many times, we don't have to go down this rabbit trail, but I think that our ancient antediluvian ancestors, that they had a mastery of their consciousness. Let's say they had abilities, psychic abilities that were we would equate to superheroes today. And we have a residue of that. We're broken down versions of our antediluvian ancestors. So we still have the remnant of these capabilities, but they're not as attuned, and certain individuals, certain remote viewers, Mr. Swan, for example, are perhaps a little more in tune, a little more practiced in these capabilities, such as remote viewing. So it is very, very interesting that the Kona Blue Project wanted to combine all of these different fields and continue the work of ATIP and see where it led them. That's very interesting. However, I think we need to keep in mind that what we're looking at when we talk about ATIP, when we're talking about, which obviously was a real program that Lou Elizondo was involved with for a long time, for some years. When we talk about certainly Arrow, we're looking at a surface level analysis of the phenomenon. Even though these programs might have access to documentation that we don't, they have access to, in Bigelow's case, had access to Skinwalker Ranch. Now it's owned by Brandon Fugel. And even though perhaps they have information that the general public doesn't have, this is still surface level investigation. Okay, we're way beyond investigating the phenomenon. The real special access black budget projects have already been reverse engineering this technology. This is attested by Colonel Corso, Philip J. Corso, who came out and basically blew the whistle. And Corso was the head of research and development at the Pentagon. And he was a very, very highly decorated soldier. And Colonel Corso, in his own admission, he published a book. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Trying to recall the name of that book. Was it The Day After Roswell? I don't remember. But he published a book in which he says, before he died, he says that he put truthful and untruthful information in the book to give himself to kind of I forget the way he put it, to protect himself and his family. It was the idea. But then later on, he published a document that he wanted to get a second stab at it and publish something that was just truthful. So he published this document. I'm trying to remember the name of the document. It was in PDF form, and it's not well known, and you're not going to find it on Amazon or something like that. It'll come to me, I'm sure, as I'm talking. But he published this document in which he just told the truth. And both the book and the document are similar, the PDF, this other publication by Colonel Corso. But he says that even the technology that I'm using right now to communicate with you right now, fiber optics, was reverse engineered from alien technology and was being used by the military for years before it became it became available to the general public. And he describes a scenario in which the priority, the Pentagon's priority, is to derive technology that can be used for military application. That's the priority, right? Aerospace technology and other kinds of technology, weapons and so forth, that can be used for military application. And once that technology is integrated and we've created our own hybridized aerospace vehicles and the decades go on, then they will leak some of this technology into the private sector.
You can see the timeline of events on that one too. It's been done very smoothly. Like, you know, the average person, you tell them that their fiber optics in their apartment building was, you know, sourced from non-human intelligence. It probably wouldn't even register. It's such an outlandish thought.
Yeah, and there's a handful of technologies that Colonel Corso said were derived directly from crash retrieval, reverse engineered technologies, devices, and I do believe Colonel Corso's testimony, especially the document, which again, it's on the tip of my tongue here. I'm not talking about the published book, which does have a lot of truth in it, according to Corso, but he had to sprinkle in some intentional misinformation.
Right.
But I'm more referencing the PDF that was that was given to some.
Well, if you find it,
ufologists,
you can always
before his death.
You can always send it my way. I can put it into the show notes of this afterwards. But considering the time right now, I wanted to throw you a couple of questions directly from the audience, and if we can do almost like a lightning round thing, because around 8:30 or so, I'd like to be able to put a cap on this one and try to leave some big, because now I have a couple of questions that I know can be another show.
The manuscript is called Dawn of a New Age. I just pulled it up on my computer.
And when was it published?
Dawn of a New Age. But yeah, let's do it.
Oh wait, when was it published? Dawn of a New Age.
I have to find the file again. I just clicked it off. You know, I don't know when it was published. It wasn't officially published.
Not like through a publisher.
Put a date on it. I don't see a date on it. You have to look it up. But it's not. I don't believe it's been officially published. It was given to. I forget who exactly it was given to. It was given to a ufologist or a group of ufologists before Colonel Corso died. He wanted his he wanted the full truthful testimony to be to be available to ufologists. So it's really remarkable. When you read his full testimony, and again, this was shortly before he died. So,
Colonel Court, if you want, I can pass it along. I can put it up on the official forum on the website, and people can talk about it. I'll hit you up after the show. Maybe you can send it to me through email.
I'm not sure I'm authorized to distribute it.
Oh, it's like that. So, okay, all right. Well, then perhaps.
But it is available. It is available. You can find it online. Dawn of a New Age. I don't know if someone has a copyright on it, and I just don't want to get in trouble for distributing somebody's copyrighted thing.
Gotcha. Understood. So then here's what we'll do with the remaining time. Got a couple of questions from the audience. I'm sure that you can probably dissertate on all of these for a half hour each, but give them the best nutshell you can for some of these. Here's the first one from Cody. It says, "Hey Frank, can you please ask Timothy where I can read about the gods of the Bible and how there's there are multiple that control different areas of the earth? I believe I heard him talk about it in the past, but I don't remember what that episode was."
I would direct him to The Unseen Realm by Dr. Michael Heiser.
I was thinking that you were gonna put that out there. Michael Heiser's work, Cody. I've seen a couple of presentations on that question in particular. It's very illuminating. Here's another one. Cody asks a follow-up. Can you also ask Timothy if he believes that Yahweh of the Old Testament is God the Father that Jesus refers to? I understand that's a huge can of worms, so if you don't want to ask that, it's fine, but it would be cool if you could skim over it real quick if possible. Thanks, Frank.
There's really nothing to skim over. The answer is yes. And I know that it's become quite popular now on the internet to suggest that Yahweh was like this evil, devious, bloodthirsty God, and that the Jews either modified the deity or he was a separate deity altogether from Jesus' father. But it's clear that the Gospels make it crystal clear that we're talking about Yahweh as in regard to Jesus' father.
Okay, here's another one. Let's see here. These are from quitefrankly.tv, Foxhole. Brewbark says, can you please ask Timothy if he's ever reviewed the works of Paul Wallace and Mauro Birthright regarding...
I don't know. I don't know if I have or not. I don't recognize those names. Maybe I've come across something. What do they publish in?
He says all their work is regards to Hebrew mistranslations.
Oh, okay. What were the names again?
Paul Wallace, Wallis, and Mauro Birthright. That's Biglino.
Yeah. Okay, I have come across these guys. I would refer them to Michael Heiser's work. I think Heiser was a much better ancient Near Eastern language scholar than they are. I've seen some of these supposed mistranslations, and I just don't think they're very good. I would defer to Heiser and others as well, but primarily Heiser on that topic.
Okay. Cave Toad says, Frank, Birthright is a great read, digging into Enoch a lot these days, but could you please ask Timothy about his monkey? You've had somebody said that you had a pet monkey. I said, well, I'd believe that. You were living in the rainforest for God knows how many years. There's
not one monkey. I've had, let me see if I can do a quick count here. I've had at least 4 different monkeys, all different species.
Wow.
I had
just living locally?
Living in Tarapoto, Peru, as pets. That's the Amazon basin. And I also had a sloth. I had a couple different kind of snakes. I had parrots. I had these little jungle raccoons. I had a bunch of animals, and sometimes I had different animals at different periods of time, but always had monkeys.
What's it like holding a sloth? I always thought it was really weird that they stiffen up and hold out their arms when they're picked up. I'd rather them just go limp when they're picked up.
Sloths are they're very strong. The sloth is a really weird creature. I remember my wife and I we had this sloth. It was a one of the two-toed sloths, the large. It's a two-toed, right? The large gray one, and we just sort of positioned it on the back of this chair. It was gripping the back of the chair, and we were holding its hand, and it was just so strong, and it looked like they look like robots when they move.
Yeah, they do. I never got to hold one. I don't know if I would, but still,
very gentle. They're very gentle creatures, and sloth is one of the few animals that cries.
Really?
By the way, you mentioned the Book of Enoch. I'm going to be publishing my own Book of Enoch soon. This is my own edition. This is a proof. So I'm very close to actually publishing it. I'm publishing it with Luke Rogers and Nate Henry from the Blurry Creatures podcast. This will be coming out soon.
Wow.
Very soon. I've got my own introduction and commentary in here. I give commentary on the Book of the Watchers. And what's really cool about this Book of Enoch, our edition of the Book of Enoch, we've included, I wrote conceptual scenes, and we've included concept art that goes with the conceptual scenes. I know it's hard to see, but it's very, very cool. So
it's awesome to see you holding it, because the last time you were on, you were talking about the book being compiled, and it's just so awesome to see a finished product in your hand.
Yeah, it's I'm making some modifications to this, but this is the proof copy. But the final version is we're a week or two away, and this will become available. And you can track with me on social media or on my YouTube channel or on my webpage if you're interested in acquiring that. Well, I write a very interesting, if I do say so myself, interesting introduction to the Book of Enoch. I've got some information in there that people will find rather shocking.
Well, just make sure you email me when it's officially out for purchase or pre-order, and I'll add it into my nightly announcements. I'd love to help get the.
I'll certainly do that.
Yeah, I'd love to help get the word out there. I think that's all we have here. I think that's all. There's a couple others. Let me see. What is this? Oh wait, hold on. Last one. Can you have Tim remind folks of what Enoch not to pay attention to, of what Enoch not to pay attention to?
I think I know what they mean.
Okay.
Enoch is a very complex document. Even First Enoch, by the way, I have Second and Third Enoch in here as well. So this includes First, Second, and Third Enoch. Second and Third Enoch are reflective of Merkaba, chariot mysticism. They were published certainly after the birth of Christ. First Enoch is quite complex. It's not one singular author, that's apparent, and but the oldest portions of it, namely the Book of the Watchers and the Book of Parables, were certainly published before the birth of Christ, and I think are absolutely authentic in regard to the story they tell. And there's some of the most remarkable Christological prophecies that you'll ever read are in First Enoch and the Book of the Parables. So I think it is the portions of First Enoch are absolutely authentic, and portions of First Enoch I would say are the product of Merkaba mysticism.
I think we're going to have at least one really, really awesome broadcast based on that book. I can't wait to read it and mark it up with all my notes and then turn it into a broadcast. But Timothy Alberino, timothyalberino.com. It's great to have you back on tonight, man.
And if I may, I just launched a members community, and it's we got hundreds of people in the community already. It's doing private briefings, so a bunch of I'm recording videos talking about a bunch of really, really interesting topics, stuff I can't talk about on YouTube, for example. So it's uncensored. It's Alberino Uncensored, live Q&A chat sessions. We're having a great time in there. Really, really, really intriguing conversations. And if anyone's interested in that, they can go to the alberinoanalysis.com, or they can go to my website and you'll see the members tab. Come join the community.
Yeah. Everybody, please go do it, and be on the lookout for another book coming out soon. Timothy, thanks again for the time tonight. I look forward to the next.
Thank you, Frank. Always a pleasure.
All right, be well. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. TimothyAlberino.com.